Today is all about trying to fix my horrible 60 foots. As seen in the last videos, we tried to blame the shocks and the springs on this, so now I've picked up some new parts. On the left hand side here you'll see a set of Eibach springs that are the Pro kits that have been discontinued. They've been discontinued for some time, so if you pick them up you're going to have to find them on the classifieds. And when you do get them, they should have stampings on them. And this is a stamp for Eibach springs, and that is a part number for the fronts, and this is a kit number that references the fronts. The fronts will be .001 and the rears would be .002 for a 1G all-wheel drive. These springs are in pretty good condition for the most part. What you will see is that the previous owner plastered up the car, and you will see that got on the springs, but we're going to fix that with a new protective coat of paint anyway. And what you see here is the kit number. I'm trying to get it to focus in for you, and it's 6011.002 for the rears and .001 for the front springs. These springs will lower the car 1.3 inches all the way around, and they do come with an increased spring rate, which will also help hold the car more level during launching. Now we also have a set of KYB AGXs that are used. I purchased them used off the classifieds with a set of stock springs on them, so we'll have to pull these stock springs off and inspect the shocks for serviceability before we put them on the car. The way we'll do that is we'll have to remove this nut here, remove all those parts, and put these springs on. So let's get to it. We pulled into the garage here for a nice fast NASCAR pit stop to pull these tires off. Now we have some epoxy paint here by VHT that we're going to use to cover these springs for a protective coating. You may have noticed some rust on these springs earlier when I was showing you the part numbers, and you do not want to try to grind this off or sand this off by any means. That could weaken the coil, especially in the middle, and cause premature failure, and that's not something that you want. These springs, the part numbers were covered up with tape. They received 2 coatings of primer to help this paint stick, and then they received 2 coatings of this paint, but I'm not going to bore you with the second coating. Now what you're looking at here is the front struts. Now to pull these out, you'll need to remove this nut, you got one for the brake line bracket, and you have 3 that are up top in the strut tower that you'll need to remove. Now when you're removing the last of the 3 nuts from the strut tower, you need to be sure to guide the strut out with your free hand. Not doing so could result in a hurt foot or a damaged part. Now that we're done removing the fronts, we'll move to the rear. You'll need to remove this 1 bolt from the bottom mounting point, then you have 2 more nuts in the shock tower that you find through the rear hatch. You also have this 1 bolt that connects the brake line bracket. Now going into the hatch, you'll need to pop the 2 plastic covers off, remove the rubber piece, and then remove the 2 nuts holding the shock into the shock tower. Again, be sure to use your hand to guide out the shock. The next task is to disassemble the shocks and the struts. For this, I chose an OTC part number 6494 clamshell strut tool. This has 4 mounting points which are all linked together by heavy gauge steel and is a very good quality tool. However, knockoffs have been produced and they're known to not be as strong, so if you do take the path of ordering this tool, please be sure to source an OTC part. This tool can be a bit tricky at times to hook up, but notice how the ends that grab the spring are angled to a certain extent. If it won't fit one way, be sure to flip the spring compressor over and try it another way. It'll always work one way or the other, you just need to be sure to get it hooked up right. Now you'll see on the rears that I did not break the nut loose first. In return, the shaft spins and I have to hold it with a pair of pliers that are plastic lined. Now notice that I use a pair of plastic lined pliers to protect the shaft. Also, the other option is to actually break the nut loose on the end of the strut or shock before you compress the spring. This will leave a little bit of tension to allow you to break the nut loose, but do not take it all the way off. That could be catastrophic and cause serious injury to either you or those around you. This is what a bump stop looks like after 22 years of service. Not much left, and even my fingers can break it apart. You'll notice that I'm putting all these components back on the shocks, and you'll see why later. It's more of an organizational thing than anything. Again, we have what's left of a bump stop after 22 years of service. We may have enough material here to make half of a good one. The low number of coils, even on the stock front springs, is what makes it so hard to hook up. but you'll notice that it's not that bad once you get it right. Now remember that part about safety? This is why. That actually flew over and put a dent in the wall. I kind of show it here, but you can't see it because the camera's so far away. Just to show you though, that would do a lot of damage to you or anybody that was standing in its way, so please make sure that you watch out for others and use a lot of safety when you're using this tool or compressing any springs with any type of spring compressor. Here you see all the parts that we have accumulated over this time. We have the stock springs with the stock struts. We also have the KYB AGXs with the stock springs, and then we have the Eibach springs up front here that we're going to put on the car. With the springs ready for install, we should inspect both sets of shocks and struts to see their health and if they're ready to go in the car. We need to inspect the old shocks and struts to see where we stand and what we took off. As you can see, these collapse themselves, meaning they're probably no good, but we're going to check them anyway. They're supposed to expand on their own, and as you see here, I'm having to struggle to expand them. What we're going to do is flip this over and see it should expand on its own, but instead it collapses. It takes about 3 seconds and it's fully compressed. This is no good. We're going to do this one more time just to show you. Remember, these are supposed to expand on their own. Watch this. Now I inspect the rest of these shocks, taking the same precautions and seeing if they'll work, but as you can see, they collapse on their own. The ones at the end, they don't collapse, but they never grow back. Now if you watch this one AGX shock, when I push it down, you'll see it slowly grow back. This is in real time, so this is how fast they actually grow back. Now remember, these AGXs are adjustable, so all of their dampenings need to be set to 1. If you set them on 8 or 4, you will have a very hard time doing this. So make sure they're all set on 1, and then do this to make sure that they're still good. They should all grow back. You see the sped up versions, you see them grow back very quickly. Now what you'll see me doing is I'm labeling all the springs that I don't plan on using. Someday I may need to look back at these. I may need to test them for something, or somebody may need a set. So what I'm going to do here is just label what they came off of. I know that mine are actually stock springs because they came off of my car. Since I have 2 sets of parts here, we're going to choose the ones that need to go on the car. Of course, I use the ones that are the most serviceable at the time. You'll see me testing the top hats here by spinning them on my finger. I tried to catch that one on camera, but it just wouldn't pick up. It was actually a bad bearing that was grinding against each other. You'll see me checking these other top perches and these other bushings and metal parts for any scoring or pitting, rusting, or any deterioration in the rubber. I just need to go through these and make sure that I get the best set of parts for my car. You may not have this option, as you may just be working with one set, but I did, so I took full advantage. If you have any unserviceable parts at this point, you'll need to replace them. Now that we have all our parts laid out, it's time to put these things together. We start by adding pieces of rubber to the bottom of the spring. This is supposed to take up any leftover space because they're lowering springs. They're actually shorter than the stock springs were made to be. The front springs can be a little irritating when hooking up the spring compressor. It may take some time and some flipping of the spring compressor to figure it out, but you can get there. One important thing to note when assembling the front struts is that there is an alignment hole in the top spring perch and the bottom spring perch that must be aligned during assembly. You see here that I have a rod stuck through it to keep it aligned during tightening, but you also need to look up visually to make sure that it's aligned and doesn't get twisted during the tightening process. The top hats of the front strut assembly contain a bearing that needs to be greased. Be sure to pack the bottom of the bearing with grease before installing it onto the strut assembly. The rear springs are much easier to hook up on the spring compressor because of the number of coils that they have. It is very important to install the rubber hose on the rear springs because of the amount of space that is left between the bottom spring perch and the top spring perch. The rubber hose helps to take up some of that space and prevent the spring from rattling around if the shock was to ever come fully extended. Each shaft nut receives a dab of red Loctite to ensure that they stay put throughout their lifetime. Installation is quite simple. We start by torquing the bottom bolt to 65 to 80 foot-pounds of torque. We then carefully guide the shock into place using a jack and our freehand. Now we apply a bit of red Loctite and tighten the top nuts to 29 to 36 foot-pounds. Don't forget your brake line, you might need those. Now we move to installing the front struts. You need to ensure that the hole in the bottom spring perch and the hole in the top spring perch are still aligned. Again, you use a jack to gently guide the strut into place. Your bottom two nuts have a torque spec of 80 to 101 foot-pounds. The top nuts receive the same dab of red Loctite and then get tightened from 29 to 36 foot-pounds. Again, don't forget your brake line. Do not pack these with grease yet. I repeat, do not pack these with grease. You need to torque these nuts first. So you don't have a dirty socket like me, torque them first and then pack them with grease and install your dust caps. Now it's time to put her back on the ground. You need to install the tires and check for clearance between the new shocks and struts. Rotating them a few times and looking for any rubbing marks or feeling any resistance is a good way to do this. What you're left with is a car that is slightly lowered and slightly stiffer. You see here that I can barely get 3 knuckles in the front tire. The reason I use a battery is because I used to be able to stick this whole battery on top of the tire. I can't do that anymore. Walk around the car to check the other sides, and of course they all receive the same 3 finger. It's normally tight right about the knuckles. Hopefully this will keep it a little stiffer and keep it from loading up so bad on the rear when we go to the track this next time. Better 60 foots are hopefully in our future. You thought we were done? Oh, so did I. I thought I had no bloopers for this one. I actually felt pretty good. I came back into the garage to clean off this massive workbench I have here, and I got it pretty much done. The last thing I went to clean off was this weird looking washer. I had seen them all day, and I knew it belonged on something, so I got to checking it out. I was hoping it was missing off the stock shocks, but of course it wasn't. Both of them were there. I had a gut feeling that it was probably on one of the ones that went in the car. Who would have thunk it? I pop the trunk and lift the hatch. I check one side to see that, hey, it's got it. I check the other side to come to the realization that I need to install a washer. It really wasn't that bad of an install. Because its top 2 nuts and the bottom mounting point held the spring and all in place, I was able to take the nut off and install the washer and then retorque the bolt while the shock was still in the car. Better 60 foot should be just around the corner.